My puzzle of the week featured the finish to the game between Vladislav Artemiev and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Of course, Jan is our new challenger facing Magnus Carlsen for the world title at the end of the year. So what I want to do is show you the whole game, which is just a fantastic attack by our new challenger. And yeah, let's celebrate his play. So don't forget to like, comment and do subscribe. Let's try and get to 100k. Come with me on that journey together. And of course, if you want to support the channel, then the links to PayPal and Patreon are down there. Okay, so here we go. Artemiev played b3. I should say this was played in the Chessable Masters final in, June 2020, last year. And it's a rapid play game. So Artemiev goes b3. And Nepo meets it in, well, the principled way by claiming the centre with e5. And these are very interesting positions, actually, because White can play this in a number of different ways. Well, if you've seen some of my recordings of Fischer games, you'll know that Fischer used to play c4 here, which, you know, he was hoping to lead back into a kind of Sicilian. And he did that with success. Check out Fischer Anderson, that's brilliant. But, you know, you can also play knight f3 here. That's an interesting move, tempting that pawn forward. Or bishop b5, and that's the most popular move here that most b3 players like to play. So pressure on the knight, and that means pressure on the pawn on e5. Now, if one defends with d6, then that's a bit tame. And that does give White some options. You know, you can even go for f4 sometimes, but sometimes just d4. But Artemiev plays the move which is supposed to be the most testing, bishop d6. Now, this looks very odd indeed, because it blocks that d pawn. But it does defend the e pawn, and it puts the bishop on this splendid diagonal, this very dangerous diagonal. But okay, what's with the fact that it blocks the d pawn? Well, if White has brought out the bishop here and wants to take on c6, then of course Black is just going to recapture with the d pawn, and then everything's straightened out. This looks absolutely fine, and this bishop can come into play on this diagonal. So although it looks odd for the moment, in fact it should be okay. But of course White can play hardball here and doesn't have to take on c6. And indeed Artemiev played knight to a3. So he wants to get the knight to c4 to attack the bishop and more pressure on the e pawn. And one could play e4 here. The e4 is quite a reasonable move. And after knight c4, the bishop just goes back to e7. That's reasonable for both sides, actually. But Nepo continued with this slightly odd move, knight a5, covering the c4 square. So, of course, if the knight comes here, he can simply exchange and then play c6. The bishop will drop, and then pawn to d5. Everything's fine. But, of course, White is not obliged to play knight c4. And Artemiev just withdrew that bishop. And now, if the pawn comes to c6 and the bishop goes back, well, that knight is just trying to trap itself if the pawn comes to c6. So instead, Nepo played a6, preventing knight b5. c4, and then he played c5. So that provides cover for the knight to return to c6. But you know, it's a very funny situation where this pawn has blocked the knight's square, and this pawn rather blocks the bishop. But well, in a second it kind of straightens itself out. So knight c2, the knight comes back into play, and knight c6. Now, given a couple of moves, then Black will play the bishop back and then pawn to d5, and, well, gets, I think, a very healthy position. Particularly with that knight on c2, looks very odd there. So I think it's very important that white breaks out here. Of course, Artemiev understood that, and he played d4. So this could be very good for white if that's left. And, you know, pawn to d5, white could have a big space advantage. Nepo exchanges everything. And the point is this, that he can throw in a check and displace white's king. So pawn takes knight, material is even, and queen takes pawn. So both sides have gained something here. Obviously white's king is not in the best position. However, the battery of queen and bishop on this long diagonal looks pretty good. And white structurally also looks fine. Nice structure here and here. And that's an isolated pawn. And if white manages to straighten out his pieces, if this king comes to safety, maybe after g3 and king g2 and pieces out, and the rook gets in the middle, then white will have a huge positional advantage. So it's imperative that black acts very quickly here. Bishop f3 played by Artemiev. So that could cover some light squares if g3 or maybe g4 even, and king g2. Also, it's looking down this long diagonal and starting to take control over d5. So as I said, if white consolidates positionally, he's looking really good. Of course, Nepo appreciated that, and he broke with d5. So, you know, for a player with kind of instinctive attacking, well, an instinctive attacker like Nepo, then d5 just feels absolutely right. You know, you create as much chaos as possible while white's king is in the middle, so that means that white doesn't have the time to consolidate the position. Bishop takes. And queen c7, so that prepares just to bring the bishop back here potentially. Knight e2 and rook e8. Bit of pressure here. And the bishop drops back to f3, just covering that knight. And bishop f5. And the rook wants to come to d8. So already, I mean, I think black has fantastic compensation for the pawn. But still not cut and dried. Artemiev played queen to f4. Now this could be exchanged off. And then just rook in the middle. But, well, that's not to Nepo's taste. That would give white some chances to survive. So instead, queen d7 avoids the exchange of queens and of course covers the bishop. But it does allow bishop takes knight, so that rather damages black's king position. And here is where Artemiev made a move which turned out to have fatal consequences. The move that white should play here, well, how would you play if you had the white pieces here? You might, if you've seen the puzzle of the week, you'll probably remember what Artemiev played here. But white is still all right in this position. Perhaps more than all right. Okay, what should he play? The best move is pawn to g4. And that buys white some time. The king is able to step up to g2. And this rook can enter the game. Also, the knight may well come to g3 and, you know, starts to look at some nice squares, although the bishop covers for the moment. Who knows, h4 might happen here. I mean, this is just a very unclear position. Remember, it was rapid play. But instead, Artemiev played knight g3, which on the surface of it doesn't look bad. You attack the bishop. You know, he wants to play with his pieces instead of just pawns. But there is a brilliant move here, which, well, if you've already seen the puzzle of the week, you'll know what the move is. If not, have a little think. Black to play and win. Absolutely brilliant. And this shows Nepo's creativity. Bishop b1. So the threat is rook e1 checkmate, because of course the rook is blocked out. If that bishop is taken, then queen check, double attack. The king steps to the side, check, and now we give up the queen, and rook e1 mate. Very nice. There is no good defense here. Artemiev stepped to the side. Rook e1 check. The knight came back, and now queen d3 threatens queen takes knight and mate. And, well, it's utterly lost for white. Artemiev found the only way to struggle on, but it is hopeless. Check. The king just came to the side. The black king is safe. Bishop e2 blocks. Rook takes. Now rook takes. Of course, black can still blow it if he plays queen takes rook and queen takes rook. But instead, bishop c5 is a really nice move, threatening mate in 1. h4 gives the king a little bit of room, but rook takes. So, well, there is simply no defense here at all, considering that a discovered check is threatened, as well as queen takes rook. And don't forget, rook g8 as well is coming soon. So it's losing in so many different ways. And the game ended like this. Rook e1 and rook f4, check from the bishop, and then rook takes queen, and the game is over. Just a brilliant win by Jan Nepomniachtchi, and it shows his creativity in attack. Remember, a rapid play game. Not easy to spot a move like bishop b1. But also, with moves like d5, he's not afraid to throw his pieces into the position and attack like crazy. So I'll be showing you some more games played by Jan Nepomniachtchi, and well, throughout the year as we move towards November, he really is a very exciting player. Thanks for watching.